England and Scotland have been in a relationship for about 300 years, and Scotland has decided to want out of this relationship. So they've been umming and ahhing about when to have an independence vote, and they've decided that they're going to have it on the 18th of September this year. Currently, the polling is exceptionally close. For a long time, months ago, the No campaign to keep England and Scotland, or the UK, together, the No campaign was quite a number of percentage points in the lead, whereas 3 days ago the Yes campaign had a 2-point lead, whereas currently No is at 52% and Yes is at 48%. But it's changing almost daily, and it depends on the polling organisation and so on. But either way, it's really close. Currently, the situation for this referendum on independence, anyone who lives in Scotland, so an Englishman living in Scotland or a Scottish person living in Scotland, is able to vote on independence, and it's from those of the age of 16 and above. So it's not 18, you have 16-year-olds voting. And whilst there are some positives to that, I personally feel that's a really horrible mistake to make, because I certainly know that when I was 16, and I'm sure most people agree that when they were 16 they had absolutely no clue about politics and probably shouldn't have been having that much of a say in the matter. But that's the current situation. 16-year-olds and above are allowed to vote. So currently the two parties here, you have the Scottish National Party, the SNP, who are obviously voting for the Yes campaign and want Scotland to become independent. And then you have what is become known as Team Westminster, which is the Liberal Democrats, Labour and the Conservative Party, who are predominantly based down in England, who want to keep the union together. Jenks said yesterday on the show that kind of Labour, they do have a number of seats in Scotland. It's about 42 seats that they have, that if Scotland became independent they would lose. And he said that might be a bad thing because the Labour Party here in the UK is progressive. That, I feel, is an incorrect point. Whilst it's probably more progressive than the Conservative Party, it may not be as progressive as the Liberal Party when it comes to certain issues. And I think using the word progressive in a UK context is very, very different to how you'd use progressive in American political context. So I just hope that people understand that an English progressive and an American progressive are very different things. Here in the UK, the three main parties, Conservative, Lib Dem and Labour, they are all very similar on many different issues, unlike the polarised nation of the two-party system in America. So currently the situation is that if Scotland voted yes, there's a number of things that they would gain, and there's a number of things that they would lose. First of all, well, they wouldn't necessarily gain, but they would keep the Queen as the head of state, so the Queen doesn't necessarily have to worry about losing her property in Balmoral. You should keep her castle there, that's fine. Scotland's happy to keep with the royal family. One issue that's to be decided is the amount of share of the UK debt that they would have. That's something that kind of the percentage amount that they would be allocated to deal with isn't going to be decided until a couple of weeks after they voted yes, if they vote yes. Another issue that they have to deal with is what currency they will use. Currently, Alex Salmond, who's head of the Scottish National Party, is saying, yeah, we can use the British pound, that's perfectly fine. There's some issues with that. It's most likely the case that they do vote yes, they will continue to use the British pound because they wouldn't be able to use the euro or any other real form of currency. But it's an issue that Alex Salmond hasn't properly dealt with, but he just thinks that he can push forward and use the English pound. Problem is that it does leave some problems with Scottish pensions and how they will fall if Scotland does move to a slightly different currency. If they start using kind of Scottish pounds rather than British pounds, then that could really mess up a lot of the kind of national pensions. People's pensions could potentially drop, and so a lot of people are a bit wary of that. Other economic problems as well is that Scotland will then be removed from the European Union. It won't have certain, it will have different trade agreements, and it will have to re-enter the European Union and reapply, and that could take many years, and that would be a real problem, certainly for businesses within Scotland. Already a number of the banks, so the Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, and Lloyds Banking Group, they've said that they've drawn up kind of emergency plans to move some of their practices down into England because they think it'd be such a tumultuous time staying in Scotland, that they just don't want to risk it. And other businesses as well may move away from Scotland because of financial turbulence, and Scotland's tax rate may change, corporate tax rate, although Alex Salmond has said that he would really lower down the corporate tax rate in Scotland to try and make it competitive. Other things is that Scottish military, they currently they'd have about 20,000 troops in total, they reckon. However, currently the United Kingdom's nuclear arsenal, kind of our Trident system, which is our nuclear submarines, is based in Scottish ports. And so if Scotland became independent, England would then have to house our Trident system. And Scotland and Alex Salmond has admitted that if they happen to kind of put up their own independent army, as it were, they would have to buy a whole host of new battleships and probably some aircraft. They might have to build a new kind of military airport to house all these places. It's a large cost to Scotland as well. Now, the pluses to Scotland are that they'll have complete financial independence. They'll be able to do what they want. They can set their welfare amount. They can charge however much they want for university. Currently, at the moment, all Scottish universities are completely free. Their healthcare system, once they'll have the National Health Service. Here in the UK or in England, you do have to pay for kind of certain drugs and stuff. In Scotland, all the elderly get all of their prescription drugs for free, so that's something that Scotland's going to have to fork up with. But the thing is, with financial independence, they'll also have control of the oil fields up in the north, and there is a lot of money to be made that's kind of waiting underground for Scotland there. Estimates vary of how much oil is there. They say kind of if you average it out, it's about 40 years worth of oil, and I kind of feel that will keep Scotland financially afloat for 40 years, and then they may come crying back to the UK. Overall, many people think that it's in Scotland's interest to vote for independence if they want to be completely independent. However, this isn't just a black or white yes/no vote. There are a number of options to the Scottish government should they wish to take them. Currently, the SNP and Alex Salmond just want to say, nope, complete independence. We want to run our own country. There's 4 options open to them. There's voting no and keeping the absolute status quo. There's voting yes and having complete independence. And there's 2 things called Devo Plus and Devo Max. And Devo Plus is essentially they will still remain within the Union, they'll still remain part of the United Kingdom, but they'll get a bit more have allowed certain more powers of changing certain policies that will only affect Scotland. So certain powers will be devolved from Westminster in England and go up to Scotland. That's Devo Plus. And then Devo Max, so Devolution Max, it means they'd have complete financial control. They'd essentially have financial independence, but they would remain within the Union. And that's something that I would probably personally prefer that they went for. I don't necessarily want Scotland to leave. If I were able to vote, I'd vote no for Scottish independence, just because Alex Salmond as a politician is not a particularly likeable man, I find, and I'd like to see him crying when he loses. And people may be asking, oh, surely they can just vote again in a year's time. It's kind of become an agreement that this is a once-in-a-generation type of vote, so if Scotland votes no, this question isn't going to be asked for another 40, 50 years. And just one other final thing to kind of clarify in terms of facts is that people are thinking, oh, why is this being voted in now, or why is the vote happening now? There's a large number of issues, predominantly because it's in between, it's kind of not within the main political cycle in terms of Westminster politics, and also because the UK is going to be having a national election in 2015, they want to try and get things done before then. That does leave some problems in that what if Scotland were to vote yes, then they would then have kind of agreement talks with politicians in Westminster as to kind of how people proceed, the amount of debt that they would have. But that agreement would have to be reached before the 2015 election, which would be sometime in May. The problem with that is Alex Salmond could potentially be coming up with an agreement with David Cameron, the current kind of Prime Minister of the country. However, odds are David Cameron probably won't be Prime Minister after the national election, and so the new government would have to abide by an agreement made by the previous government, and that can be a problem. But everything is being rushed through rather quickly just to try and get it through the the national election. But as I said, kind of September 18th is when Scotland is going to vote, and the results will probably be in sometime by September 19th morning. It's an exceptionally close one to call. Not many people, not many professionals are putting money on it.
I'm against. I don't like the idea of a Scottish independence, in part because I'm a territorialist. I like the way the UK looks all pretty and united under one sort of flag. I like the idea of granting them more autonomy within the Union. I think that's great. That's an excellent idea. I just don't like the idea of them becoming a separate entity, in part because I don't want to call it England again. But no, Stephen's absolutely right. We don't get it here in North America. Our countries are young. Our countries have been relatively held together. A lot of these European countries have fought wars tooth and nail to stay together. And there's a lot of bubbling animosity still underneath the surface there. And I don't like the idea of them being allowed to just immediately jump free if they want to. I think that's a step backwards. Because I don't think that promotes cooperation and unity. I think that promotes, in a sense, a form of tribalism. Now, Scotland's a very different example because, for the most part, a lot of their affairs are handled outside the region. I think I'm all in favor of that changing. But there's a lot of other places. Frickin' France has a couple places that have a very long streak. Alsace-Lorraine, for example, is one that's historically unsure about it, whether or not it's German or if it's French. You have parts of Germany, frickin' Bavaria and Munich. I would not surprise me at all if they want to, if there's thoughts of them becoming separate. I mean, there's a lot of stuff under the surface of European politics, and there's a lot of different older nations, sub-nations within them. And it's a very tricky balancing act. How do you prioritize who gets to leave, and what are the implications for the rest?
Yeah, it's a very. Just before I bring Julian, I'll go to you next. But England used to own part of France. We used to own Normandy. Kind of a number of centuries ago. It's a very difficult, and I feel like a number of the Scottish they're just voting because there's this sort of. I'm sure there's probably, you have it within America, kind of certain kind of state rivalries. Kind of Alabama wants to out stupid Mississippi, and there's always been certainly kind of. I mean, sports is when it comes out the most. When English play the Scottish at rugby or at football, and it's like, oh well, we hate them because we hate them, sort of thing that we get from the Scottish, and similarly with the English. And I just really hope that people don't vote on that sort of emotion-based reason. I know people do tend to vote on emotions. That's a stupid thing to do. But I hope they actually look at the policy, look at the numbers, and I think the most important thing is whether it's financially available. So just before I go to you, Jude, I just want to throw in another question to you as well. You make your comment and then answer this. Do you think it's a good idea that they've allowed kind of 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in something as important as a country's independence?
As far as the question about age goes, I think it really depends. I'm not sure. It almost seems like you should have some sort of test to be able to vote. It seems like, in a way, in a situation like this. My son is very, very well informed politically. He's 18 years old. He has been since he was 13, 14. Of course, his views have evolved over the course of time. So it's really hard for me to say it. Yes, 16 is, it may be for some youth too young to vote on something of this magnitude. However, it may be something that is very pertinent to them at this point because this is the world that they are growing up in. I was just kind of curious as to how would it destabilize Europe? As an American and as Americans, I'm sure we have not really seen this as being an issue at the forefront. And so this has probably been something going on for quite some time. For us, it's just been the last few weeks that we've heard of it. How long has this been going on, as the discussion, so to speak?
I mean, the whole discussion of Scottish independence has been going on since like 1707 when Scotland first joined the Union, but it's really only been, I'd probably argue from about 2002, from about then, certainly kind of turn of the millennium, when there was a certain rise in minor parties. So you had the Green Party, you had kind of UKIP start to get at least a tiny bits of name recognition, and then in Scotland you had the Scottish National Party. And then kind of election after election, Scottish National Party got more and more seats in Scotland. So I mean, just kind of to explain it maybe a bit more, every single kind of county and seat in England has a seat within Westminster, and then in Scotland they also have each kind of individual county they vote kind of Labour, Liberal Democrat, Scottish National Party, UKIP if they wanted to. Monster Raving Loony Party is one that we had up there as well. At least someone who was running, they didn't win. But then those people would send their politicians down to Westminster. And one of the contentions that Scottish people have, certainly people in the Yes campaign, is that there's people within kind of people who've been voted in London, kind of borough councils. They're making decisions that are affecting Scotland, and the Scottish people just want their Scottish politicians to affect their policies, and that's one of the issues, that they just want some more political freedom. That's why I go for more of the devolution max approach. In regards to the kind of, is it destabilizing Europe in any way, I don't think it's going to have as big an effect as some media outlets are saying. I think it's going to give certain independence movements in other countries a bit more of a jab. But the thing is that since kind of the euro was formed, there's this whole idea when that started that kind of, oh, Europe will come together and it'll just be one big entity, and that's kind of all really nice and it'll be all lovely. It'll be like America's a superpower, China's a superpower, and you just have this Europia as a superpower. And it turned out that whilst that worked well for a number of years, then it started to falling apart because not all countries are equal. We saw kind of Italy and Greece get into problems, and Portugal and Ireland as well. And I think people are saying, well, maybe we should, when Greece went into huge financial trouble, we're saying, well, maybe we should kick Greece out of Europe because they're just a huge economic burden on kind of the European Union and the European currency. And so if Scotland then kind of goes independent and say, well, kind of that country can live on its own within the geographical kind of scope of Europe, that can be independent, and Norway and kind of the Scandinavian countries, they can be independent. So, and I think people may have a slight fear that in people's minds think, oh, well, maybe Europe isn't such a good idea, maybe we should kind of fragment and go back to kind of the Germans using their own currency, the French using francs, and so on. And I think that's maybe one of the worries that people have about Scottish independence. But to be honest, Scotland isn't the biggest, well, it's not a country yet, but it's not big enough to cause large enough ripples for that to happen. But it'll certainly get people thinking about that sort of idea. Jenk thought it'd be kind of a nice idea that if Scotland voted for independence, and it would be an opportunity to see a Western country. I mean, okay, we've seen countries like Iraq and stuff try to form its own constitution, but that's kind of fallen by the wayside for the large part because it's such a chaotic region. But obviously Scotland isn't in a civil war or anything like that, so it would be interesting to see what sort of constitution they would write. Problem is, I think for the most part they'd copy pretty much all of the UK laws. They'd maybe change a few ones that kind of are stupid anyway, and that kind of English law system is just needs to get round to changing or completely getting rid of. The only thing that Scotland really wants is just financial independence and be able to kind of decide how much they spend on education, how much they spend on the military, kind of certain tax rates and things like that. It really is just a financial and economic argument kind of behind the whole independence. There's not that much else to it. And from the numbers, I mean, problem is people can kind of fiddle with numbers any way they want. For the most part, it seems like it could work in Scotland's favour for a while, assuming that the North Sea oil reserves are there. But once those run dry, Scotland's really going to be in a world of hurt, I think, because they're not going to have any real, I know Jenk likes to say he loves to go to Scotland on holiday, but there's really not a lot there. And the rainfall, I mean, one interesting bonus that will happen if England and Scotland do separate is that the average rainfall in the United Kingdom, if Scotland went separate, the average rainfall across the country would drop by 10 centimetres every year, because Scotland gets so much rain. So that would be a slight positive, and also our life expectancy would go up if Scotland went independent.
On paper, we're not talking in actual fact. We're just talking on paper, obviously. Which is, I guess, if we're gonna go by on paper pluses, okay.
Yeah, I mean, people are saying kind of obviously freedom is the best way to go. More freedom is a good thing, and it depends how you set out the boundaries of that freedom. I know that's a funny phrase to use, but that's why I really do think that the devolution max is the best thing, because it will give Scotland kind of complete control over how it runs its own affairs, whilst it will also allow Scotland to have the same sort of clout that it currently has on the international stage. Were it to go separate, Alex Salmond saying, "Oh no, we'll still be treated kind of just as powerfully, you know, a proud nation of Scots and stuff." The thing is, it would just be ignored. It'd be seen like kind of a client state of the UK, and it just simply, and it, I mean, it would also negatively impact England as well. I know, kind of Cenk, I think it was more of a throwaway comment, but he said, you know, people are saying it may be kicked off the Security Council at the UN if Scotland went independent, because there'd be the argument that England is no longer that much of an economic superpower. That's not the case, and I don't think that would happen. But certainly in terms of kind of economic trade agreements, kind of just other kind of peace treaties and things like that, it would mean that both countries, were they separate, they wouldn't have as much world presence as they would together. So if they stayed within the Union, but just if we, the English, gave kind of the Scottish Parliament its own powers, I mean, currently in Wales, they have a devolution house, so they can choose how much they spend in the NHS. They can reallocate resources in kind of for education and things like that. And while Scotland already does have a number of those powers, they just want a couple more of those powers. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. If they run their own affairs, then that's fine. I mean, for example, somebody made a point a while ago that you know, we had kind of the Royal Bank of Scotland had to be bailed out, and because it was part of the United Kingdom, we could afford just to bail it out. Whereas if Scotland were independent, they would have been hit. It would have been worse than kind of Greece's situation if they had to bail out the Royal Bank of Scotland. And I think also I just want to address a point that was raised in the comments by some say Downton Tom, you know, about the north-south divide in England and whether it were like a kind of the Confederacy, that sort of thing. In England, there is a sort of cultural idea that there is a distinct divide between the north and the south. Kind of the north is kind of sort of grim up north. It's kind of a bit hard. Kind of they're all hard cases, and it's all kind of they're a bit poorer up there. And it's more miserable in the south. They're more affluent. They're more posh, and all of those things. And I think there is definitely a cultural north-south divide, and I think there is also an economic one, and that's something that can't be swept away. But I think that it's not as bad as people make out it to be, and so I just wanted to address that. Yes, there is England certainly isn't just one nation, all exactly the same. Whilst they're a small island, there is a distinct difference between the north and south of the country.